All right, let's dive into something wild. We're going to look at a way of thinking that says baking isn't just a hobby or a craft. It's a model for understanding everything. The idea is that inside every single loaf of bread, there's this huge cosmic drama playing out. So let's kick things off with a big, kind of weird question. What if a simple loaf of bread could actually explain the universe? I'm serious. What if the whole process, making it, baking it, even eating it, isn't just about following a recipe, but is a perfect map for how existence itself works?
Okay, so the key to this whole thing is a concept called the Ouroboros. You've probably seen this symbol before, right? It's that ancient image of a snake or a dragon eating its own tail. It's all about a self-contained, cyclical system where the end is also the beginning. Definitely keep this image in your head because, well, we're about to see it pop up everywhere in the world of baking.
So in this way of looking at things, that lump of dough in the bowl, that is the universe. The theory calls it a unified manifold, which sounds complicated, but it's really not. It just means it's one single thing, the dough. But it's also a chaotic mix of billions of tiny individual parts. You've got your starch granules, your yeast cells, your protein strands, all jumbled together. It's this amazing paradox of being both one and many, all at the same time, right there in your kitchen.
All right, so if the dough is our universe, we need to understand the pieces that make it up. Let's meet the cast of characters, so to speak. And these aren't just ingredients in the normal sense. In this system, they're more like cosmic archetypes, each with a very specific, very important job to do.
And this is where it gets really, really cool. The theory assigns these incredibly deep philosophical roles to our everyday ingredients. Flour, that's the systemic part. It's the scaffolding of reality. Yeast is the autonomous part, that little spark of life. Water is relational, the thing that connects everything. And salt? Salt is the adaptive part, the great harmonizer that keeps it all in balance.
Yeah, so think about flour. It's basically the laws of physics for our bread universe. Its proteins create that gluten network, which is the literal scaffolding holding this whole reality together. The flour has to completely give up its own identity as a powder to become the framework for the loaf. And without it, the whole universe just collapses.
Then you've got yeast. This is fascinating. Yeast is its own living, breathing thing. It has its own agenda, you know? All it wants to do is eat, survive, and make more yeast. It couldn't care less about your perfect loaf of bread. For the yeast, the dough is just the environment it's colonizing. This means the baker isn't really a master here. They're more like a diplomat, trying to negotiate with this tiny life form using things like time and temperature.
Okay, so we have our parts, but of course, they don't just sit there looking at each other. They all interact in this really dynamic four-phase cycle. This is the loop of creation itself, where the dough literally comes alive, undergoes a massive transformation, and, in the end, is reborn. So how does this loop work? Well, it all starts with mixing. That's where the baker imposes order on all that chaos. Then comes fermentation, and this is where the yeast gets to work, breathing life into the whole system. After that, we hit baking, a pretty violent, chaotic transformation that locks everything into a permanent state. And finally, there's staling. Now, you might think of that as the end, right? The slow slide into decay. But as we're going to see, it's not an end at all. It's actually the bridge to the next cycle.
Let's talk about that baking phase, because it's wild. The theory calls it the transformative spiral, and that's exactly what it is. The second that dough hits the hot oven, it's pure chaos. You've got gases expanding like crazy, the yeast going into one last final frenzy of activity, and the whole thing goes through this incredible phase transition. It literally locks what was a dynamic, liquidy foam into a permanent, solid sponge.
And even inside all that chaos, there are these really specific, critical moments. At around 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the yeast has its final wild burst of energy, and then it dies. A little later, at 160, the starches start to swell up with water, and that's what begins to set the crumb. And then, once you get above 280 degrees, you get the magic. The Maillard reaction kicks in. That's what gives you that gorgeous brown crust and all of that incredible flavor.
So you might think this whole process is driven by everything working together in perfect harmony. But it's not. The engine that drives this entire cycle is actually conflict. It's a series of really fundamental paradoxes, these creative tensions that the baker has to constantly manage and balance.
Okay, first up is what's called the thermodynamic paradox. Think about it. The crust and the crumb want completely opposite things. The crust needs super high, dry heat to get brown and crispy. But the inside, the crumb, needs gentle, moist heat to stay soft and light. So how on earth do you do both at the same time in the same oven? Well, the secret weapon is steam. The steam keeps the surface of the dough moist just long enough for the crumb to expand fully before that crust finally sets and hardens. Next up, you've got the gluten paradox. On one hand, you need a really strong gluten network to give the bread structure, right? To trap all that gas and give it that nice chew. But on the other hand, if you want something tender, like a biscuit or a cake, you actually need to weaken that same network. So what's the solution? The great mediator here is fat. Fat literally gets in between the gluten strands, shortening them, which is where the name comes from, and that's what gives you tenderness.
And last but definitely not least is the paradox the baker themselves has to deal with every single day. You have the recipe, right? That's your map. It's precise, it's scientific. But then you have the dough, and the dough is the territory. It's a living thing that can change based on the temperature, the humidity, a million little things. So true mastery isn't just about following the map perfectly. Real mastery is knowing when the territory has changed and knowing when to put the map down and just trust your gut.
So, that brings us all the way to the end of the process. Or does it? Because remember, in an Ouroboros system, the end is never really the end. This is that moment where the serpent finally catches its own tail, the circuit is completed, and the whole thing gets ready to start all over again.
And this theory has just a fantastic name for this moment. It's called the radiant chomp. It's not just about taking a bite. It's the philosophical peak of the entire journey. It's where the loop finally closes and finds its true purpose.
You see, eating the bread isn't the final step. It's the first step of the next loop. The destruction of that loaf, chewing it, is what creates life and energy for the person eating it. And that energy, that nourishment, plus the knowledge you gained from that specific loaf, gives you the fuel to go feed your sourdough starter and kick off the whole cycle again. The end becomes the beginning.
And that's really the final thought to leave you with. This whole cycle, this loop of creation, transformation, and rebirth, it's not just about baking, is it? It's a pattern you can see in almost any creative process. So it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What will you create in your next cycle?